Hitler's Rise and Holocaust Size. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MBDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is February 18th, 2021. And on this date in history, 20 years ago today, Dale Earnhardt Sr., by the way, he was alive back then, but not for long, died. Yeah. It's the only NASCAR race I've ever watched, and I turned it on about 10 seconds before this happened. I watched it with my sister, and, well, anyway, apparently every time I watch a NASCAR race, someone important dies. I'll watch you race later. Okay, it's time to talk about Adolf Hitler. So, with him, you kind of have to start with his father, Alois. Okay, Alois was a bastard. He was an illegitimate child. His mom was not married whenever he was conceived, and her last name was Schuckelgruber. And he would have been kept out of any type of government jobs or any jobs of importance, because if you were an illegitimate child, you were treated as if you were a mistake. Now, luckily for Alois's mom, she married a man whose last name was Hitler, and instead of him being this illegitimate child who was never open to any type of respectable jobs or inheritance, now is someone who can get those type of jobs, and this probably changes the fate of the world as a result of this. So, Alois Hitler gets married. He has two daughters, and then his wife has a son, and she dies, and the baby dies. So then he marries his niece. Now, this is not his niece by blood, but by marriage. So this is his wife's brother's daughter. Her name was Clara. Okay, and so he marries Clara. She gets pregnant, and the first baby is stillborn. She gets pregnant, and the baby dies of SIDS within the first month. Then she gets married. She gets pregnant a third time, and this time she has Adolf Hitler, and she's so thankful that this baby has survived. They're so proud and so happy about having baby Hitler. Okay, now Alois wanted his father to follow, or he wanted his son to follow in his footsteps and work for the government just like he did. So he's really pushing hard for Hitler to go to school to become a civil servant like himself. But Alois dies, and so Hitler then drops out of school and tries to get into art school. He goes to Vienna. By the way, he is not German, he is Austrian by birth. He goes to Vienna, applies to the art school, and he does not get in. He then becomes homeless, living on the streets, painting paintings to try and pay bills, and also trying to sell what artwork he could do. He made a lot of postcards, but he's really starving. And the only reason that he survives the early aughts is because of Jewish soup kitchens, which were providing him with food. But he's really in a lot of trouble because, there's really nothing for him. He doesn't fit anywhere in society. The thing that saves him, though, is World War I. So when World War I breaks out, instead of joining the Austrian military, he goes to Munich, and there he joins the German military, and he has a very distinguished career. He wins 2 Iron Crosses, which are equivalent to the Medal of Honor. He had a very dangerous position that most people died within the first day of doing, where he was running messages back and forth on the front, and he did that until he was gassed, and he actually was blind for a few days, and well, that was his military record. Afterwards, the German military was reduced to 100,000 people by the Treaty of Versailles, and so he is given a job within the military or with the government, and his job is to go and spy on political parties and see who is dangerous and who's not. Okay? And as he's going from group to group, he tells his superiors, they're not a threat, not a threat, not a threat, not a threat. Then finally he goes to one and he said, well, they're not a threat, but if they do A, B, and C, then they might be someone that we have to reckon with. And that is going to lead to this. The beer hall push. So, from the beer hall where they were meeting, people used to go into beer halls, drink, and also talk and, make political plans and plans for the future. And so there he meets up with a bunch of like-minded people. He starts to make speeches about how the Germans were stabbed in the back. And, well, anyway, let me go and I'm going to show you some images of that right now. Okay, so the beer hall push, what happens is they're in Bavaria, that is one of the largest German former nations, and he tries to put together a group of people to overtake the kingdom. He is, they're called the Brown Shirts, the people that he's leading. So they get together, about 5,000 troops. They go in, march into the capital to try and take it over. He and the majority of people that are in charge of it are arrested. He's put into a jail cell. You see him up on the top right-hand side. That is him in jail, wearing a suit, looking out a window. They put him in the type of prison that you kind of like for your rich white-collar criminals. So he actually doesn't have... There's a lock on his cell, but it's one he locks from the inside. And after 11 months, he decides that he's done, and he ends up walking. The judge who tries him, that puts him in jail, listens to what he's saying, and he actually agrees with everything that Hitler is saying. And, he said, but unfortunately I have to put you in jail, so he puts him in this jail where Hitler does to get some attention to what he's trying to do. And for no apparent reason, in the bottom right-hand side, there's a picture of Hitler wearing shorts. Because I know that all of you have really wondered, what did Hitler's knees look like? Well, now you get to see. And by the way, those aren't really white calves that he has. He's wearing white socks. Does that make him more attractive? I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of if you find Hitler attractive or not. It's not a conversation I'm really ready to have. But while he was in prison, he wrote a book. This book is dictated to someone else, so whenever I say wrote, I only mean that he kind of put this together. His book was called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And he starts to explain all of his ideas. One of the things he says is he needs to go and unite all the Germans together. The Germans were a master race called Aryans. Okay, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Now, this is not something that he makes up. This is, well, not the master race, the Aryan part, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. This is the German Teutonic theory that had been around for about 1,200 years. And the Teutonic theory said that the angels were watching the Germans and were so enamored with their skill in battle that they lusted after them. So they came down and they had sex with the Germans and they made these babies, the Aryans. Okay, that's the Teutonic theory, and that was one that a lot of Germans held. And they said you can look in the churches and see evidence that we are indeed the master race, because most of the time whenever they depicted Christians or the saints or angels, they were all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and they had a glow around their head because they were holy. So people really embraced it, and what helped with him pushing this theory is the fact that he was not blonde-haired or blue-eyed. So it's easy to put together a master race if you're the main person being described, but by him going to this, more people listen to him. Now, he had a few other things that were a bit out there, a little bit more out there than the fact that angels had sex with Germans, and that is that he wanted to enslave Eastern Europeans because they were inferior people, and he also thought the Jews were responsible for the world's problems and should be removed from the equation. He made the Nazis the largest political party, but it did not have a majority. He actually got another party to support him, and he was eventually appointed the Prime Minister of Germany when the whenever the other leader he was sharing power with dies, he becomes dictator for life and burns down the Reichstag and blames it on the Jews. And well, no, actually, he blamed it on the communists, which allowed him to arrest all the communists first, and then later the Jews and everyone else who was all part of that big conspiracy. So, in 1936, after Hitler had finally established his power and established himself as the leader of the Third Reich, you have the creation of what's called the Rome-Berlin Axis. Hitler and Mussolini became allies in 1936. There they are, sitting in a convertible, driving down in a big parade, smiling about how they are best friends. Now, here is a parade through Berlin. You can see just how many people are involved in the parade. You can see the soldiers on the outside. You can't see a lot of people watching the parade. And I know what you're thinking. Is that Hitler in the middle of that big square there? The answer is no. That's not Hitler. Hitler's actually got a much bigger square in the parade, but that's just one of his lower level lieutenants, and a lot of people aspired to that because of the amount of respect that he received. Now, we're moving into the Holocaust, and I'm focusing mainly on the Jewish portion of the Holocaust. However, I need to let you know that it doesn't just include the Jews. It also includes killing off 95% of the gypsies that were in Europe. It also included Soviet prisoners, Polish people, and then people that were disabled or retarded in Germany were included in the numbers that he killed, as well as any political opponents. So, when we talk about we talk about the Holocaust, they didn't really invent hating the Jews. This had been around for about 6,000 years right now. And this goes really back to the Egyptians whenever they enslaved the Jews for several generations until there were millions of Jews that ended up leaving under Moses, if you're familiar with that story. But they go out, they conquer the land that is Israel today, and they have no problems after that, right? Unless, of course, you're going to include when Babylon goes in under Nebuchadnezzar and kidnaps the majority of the children, kills off the majority of the adult population, and takes most of the wealth of Israel back to Babylon. Now, after 2 generations in Babylon, the Jews are allowed to go back, and then everything is good from then on. Except for the fact that it was conquered by Rome. And in the year 70, so whenever I say year 70, that means it was, 1,950 years ago. So back in 70, the Roman army destroyed Jerusalem because they were staging a large rebellion. They killed over 1 million Jews and took about 100,000 into slavery and captivity. And they kicked out a lot of people out of Palestine to other locations in the Roman Empire. So you have a large disbursement of people. Now, these Jews, all their wealth was used to build the Colosseum, and their slave labor was used to build the Colosseum. So when you see the Colosseum, just know that it was built with the blood and the money of Jews in the past. In 113, Jews in Greece, in Egypt, and Mesopotamia revolted, and hundreds of thousands of Jews died in this situation also. And then in the year 132, the Messiah was born. We all know this story, right? Bar Kokhba, who was the Messiah, was born. He led a 3-year revolt against the Roman Empire. In this revolt, 500,000 Jews died. Thousands were sold into slavery, and the rest of the Jews were exiled from Palestine in what's called the diaspora. Okay? And that's where they're kicked out. Now, the truth is, as they were going into other communities, no one wanted them, and they kept kicking them out further and further and further. The ones that were allowed to stay were given some of the worst jobs in Europe, and the worst jobs are always the worst job. And when you think about the worst jobs you can get, a lot of people want to start off saying, trash collector. But then there's always, whenever you're a trash collector, did you pick up anything cool? Okay. Oh, what's the weirdest thing that someone's thrown away? Has anyone ever thrown away money, or have you ever found a dead body in the trash? Those kind of people at parties, people want to talk to. But the people that no one wants to talk to is the bill collector, and those are the jobs that were given to the Jews. And throughout centuries of having to do this, you kind of get good at managing money so that you and your family are not murdered. Now, in the year 1096, they have the First Crusade. They go into Jerusalem, and as they get there, any Jews or Muslims that did not convert that lived in Jerusalem were slaughtered in the streets. They called the Jews Christ killers. And whenever armies were returning back to Germany, they killed 12,000 Jews in the Rhine Valley because they were Jewish. In 1298, Jews were attacked in Austria, Bavaria, and Franconia. These are all German kingdoms. 140 Jewish communities were destroyed, and over 100,000 Jews were killed in 6 months. But then everything settles down, right? Well, no, not in any way. In 1347, you have the bubonic plague, and it killed 25 million people in 5 years. Now, the plague was actually caused by the fleas on rats. Now, many of the Jews didn't catch the disease because of sanitary reasons that were going on or sanitary things that were done in the Jewish diet.
So that's where the saying fleas on rats comes from?
Is that a saying?
It was in a movie.
Probably.
Hey Siri, what movie is the saying fleas on rats from? Your friend the rat. Hey Siri, where does the saying fleas on rats come from? That's not telling me the movie.
Except for what happened a few years later. In Toledo, in Spain, they killed 12,000 Jews. And in the lower Rhine Valley of Germany, there was an epidemic that broke out. Obviously, the Jews were poisoning the wells, and so Jews were plundered, tortured, and murdered, tens of thousands of them. Okay? But then everything's better for 17 years. Then in Seville in Spain, 70 Jewish communities were destroyed. Now, I know you're thinking, well, they're not killing a lot of Jews in Eastern Europe, but in the Ukraine, they were revolting against the Poles, and Chemniki Bogdan tried to exterminate all the Jews in the country, and they killed about 100,000 Jews and destroyed 300 Jewish communities. Then we fast forward to 1903. By the way, there's others, but these are some of the bigger ones. This is just because of two incidents that happened that lead to everything you're about to hear. So Easter's going on in Moldova, Russia, and a Christian child's murdered, and a woman at a Christian woman at a Jewish hospital kills herself. They blame the Jews, so the town got up in anger and killed 49 Jews, injured another 500, ransacked 700 homes and 600 shops and businesses, and 2,000 families were homeless. Later on, they found out that the child was actually murdered by its Christian relatives, and the suicide had nothing to do with the Jews. In 1915, Russia decided that they were trying to remove everyone that was not Orthodox. That's a type of Christianity. And so they kicked out 600,000 Jews from Russia. 100,000 of the Jews would die of exposure or starvation. The remaining 500,000 would move to Poland, where most of them and their descendants would be rounded up during the Holocaust. And then after this, the Holocaust happens. Now, if you're trying to kill off a large part of your population, people have certain rights. So one of the first obstacles that the Nazi Party had to overcome in Germany was, how do you kill citizens of your country? So one of the things that the Germans did is they started studying other countries and what they'd done to some of the population that had been massacred over the years, and they turned to the United States, where we had put our Native Americans onto reservations and starved them to death, and this kind of becomes a foundation for some of the concentration camps. They also looked at what was being done with the African American population in the South, with Jim Crow laws, laws like the poll tax, laws like literacy test, and the grandfather clause, and they used those items together to put together what was called the Nuremberg laws. And one of the main things this does is it takes citizenship from Jewish Germans. It also makes it so that if you were German, you could not marry a Jewish person, or a Jewish person could not marry a German. And so these type of things were put in place in Nuremberg.
We went there.
Yes, we did. Sorry, my wife's here. I'm not sorry she's here. I love my wife. She makes me happy. And while I'm talking about the Holocaust, sometimes I'm depressed, so I thought I would bring in the sweetest person on earth to keep me company while I'm talking about the murder of over 6 million people. So, in Germany and Austria, there was a legalized night of violence against Jewish Germans and Jewish Austrians. This is called Kristallnacht, and on November 9th, 1938, open season was started on the Jews. So you could go and you could attack, you could rob, you could do whatever you wanted, and the Jews weren't legally allowed to do anything. 90 Jews died on that night, hundreds were injured, thousands of businesses were destroyed, and 180 synagogues were looted. Okay? So, now, in the beginning, Jews were allowed their own culture in private, but you had to wear symbols on that showed who and what you were. Now, if you had to wear a gold star if you were Jewish. Now, up on the top left-hand side, there's a chart of some of the other types of stars that you would wear. So up in the top left-hand side, you see political. So if you were a political opponent, you had to wear a red star, a red triangle, or a gold and red star if you were Jewish. If you're a criminal of any type, you had to wear a green triangle. Antisocial. Now, that word today kind of means that you don't talk to anyone, you kind of stay off to yourself, but it also means that you could be someone that is an agitator or a problem in society. So maybe you're trying to raise awareness for a group. An example of someone who might be termed antisocial by certain people would be the Black Lives Matter group that's trying to create change. They might have been seen as antisocial had they been in Hitler's Germany. I know, Hitler's racist. What the crap? Anyway, moving on. The pink triangle is what you would wear if you were homosexual. Okay? It doesn't become really acceptable socially anywhere to be a homosexual until about the year 2000. A lot of things change about that time. If you wore a blue triangle, then you were an immigrant, and a purple triangle, you were a Jehovah's Witness. So they had all types of ways of distinguishing people that they didn't like. Now, the Nazis actually are going to boycott any Jewish goods, and they will actually, through law, force them to sell most of the things they own for almost nothing. Now, in the beginning, about 80% of the Germans supported the initial attacks on Jews, not because they hated Jews, but because they would become wealthier. Hitler promised that their lives would be better if they put him in power, and many people were moving into nicer homes, living in better neighborhoods, and their lives actually were better, and not many people asked where all this came from. Now, Nazi leaders got together at the Wannsee Conference, and they put together the final solution. This final solution was rounding up Jews and other undesirables. These are Slavics, these are intellectuals, Russian POWs, gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. And they would send them to concentration camps where they would work as slave laborers. Now, uh, the elderly, the sick, and the young were taken and separated from these groups and gassed in chambers as soon as they got there. Now, eventually, these people, most of them would end up in extermination camps where thousands and thousands were killed each day. At Auschwitz, for example, they were able to kill and cremate 12,000 people a day. Uh, anyway, that's a picture of some of the meeting rooms that they were in and the people that were meeting at the Wannsee conference. You can see that big, beautiful house. There's a beautiful lake behind it. It's very serene, and there they planned to kill about 9 million people is how many people they killed by the time the Holocaust was over. The majority of them were Jews, but a lot of them were from some of the other groups we just talked about. Now, this is where all of the major Nazi concentration and extermination camps were in Europe. Now, most of the extermination camps were actually in Poland. That way you didn't have the smell of death all over the German population all the time. But one of the craziest things that happened whenever my wife and I were in Europe driving from place to place was the fact that we saw Dachau and Sachsenhausen, two of the concentration camps, were right in the middle of neighborhoods, and we're driving using GPS to try and find these camps, and we're both looking at each other like, well, obviously we're in the wrong place because we're in a neighborhood. But then you go and you see this little dirt or gravel road that leads right back between two houses to a concentration camp. So it was a very crazy, very surreal thing for us to see. Now, what happened is they took all the Jews and they took them out of their houses, gave their homes to other German families so that they would actually see the gains that were promised to them. They're put in these ghettos where they were starved out over the next over 6 months to 18 months. And then they were told, okay, you've been good. We're going to send you off to a better place. We're going to send you out east. They'd get everyone, take your possessions with you, just what you can carry, and they would take and force them all onto these trains. All of the people there in that crowd are crammed onto those trains so tight that there's only standing room for them, and they're right up against people. So if you fall asleep, you fall asleep standing up. You might spend the next 5 to 8 days in those trains. So that means you're not eating over that time, you're not drinking, and if you have to go to the bathroom, you go right where you stand. Not that I'm trying to find a better way to end the war, but the truth is, this process right here actually will cause Hitler to lose the war, because instead of moving supplies out to the east so he can fight the Soviets, he's using the trains almost exclusively for moving Jews. And so so all the possessions they had were sifted through by the Germans. The Jews kept great records, and so as they're moving from their nice homes into the ghettos, into the cars, there were all of their major possessions they had insurance on, and so they were looking for all of these items that were missing. And so then they could go through that, and some of them might have been hiding some of the things on them, whether in their jackets, or several people would swallow some of their diamonds so they would have something to trade with later. Now, once you arrived at the concentration camps, all of them had this sign that would say Arbeit macht frei, which means work will set you free. Now, this right here on the right hand side, that is a picture of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and on the left is a labeled area as well. So what would happen is once you got there, you would get off the trains, and then they would have you stripped down naked, and you all stood in rows. Now, in Germany, it gets really cold. Imagine if it were 20 degrees outside. Now, you might be standing out there stark naked for 4 to 6 hours as they're processing everyone. They don't really care how long it takes because that's all they have to do all day. So what would happen is they would go through with a clipboard, and they were looking for certain items that were missing from their homes or the ghettos or from their suitcases. And so as they're going through, what they would do is look and have people open their mouth. They're standing a shoulders width apart. You weren't allowed to lean, sit down, do anything. You just stood there until they got to you. And you opened your mouth. If they saw that you had a gold tooth, they would go to the person next to you in line, give them a pair of pliers to go and yank it out of their mouth. If they had reason to suspect that you might have swallowed a diamond or jewelry of some value, then they would hand the person next to them a knife and have them cut it out of you. And if you didn't do what they said, they didn't shoot and kill you. They might turn to a small child that is next to you, shoot them in the stomach, and then you see them die and bleed out over the entire time you're standing there, or maybe even over the next couple of days, where you were forced to stand there and watch as they did that. And if that didn't get your attention, they might shoot an additional member of your family. So people were compliant mainly for their survival. And so then they'd be cutting through organs, trying to find whatever jewel or jewelry that they were looking for, slicing the person to bits and them dying as well. And then sometimes they might find it, or sometimes they wouldn't. Once this was completed, you were taken to the next place. You're still standing out there stark naked in front of everyone. And they would take you and they would shave all the hair off your head. Okay? That way you don't really look much different than anyone else around you. They then take you to an area where you would be tattooed with your number for the camp. And the idea behind this was one for record keeping. The Germans kept outstanding records of everyone that they killed during the Holocaust. Now, they did this because they wanted to show the world what they had done for them. Because they thought they were doing, they were doing God's work in a way. Not the Christian God, but, they were doing what was best for society. And so they were very proud of what they were doing. And getting the tattoo, if you're Jewish, according to the Jewish faith, if you get a tattoo, you're going to hell. Okay? So the Germans were, at the same time, for record keeping, putting a tattoo on them so they could figure out who each person was. And at the same time, they were taking away their afterlife and making them go to hell. So it was a much more in-depth punishment. Now, if you are caught today with a tattoo and you're trying to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, they don't bury you with your family. They bury you over in an area where they put people who committed suicides and criminals. Now, if you have a tattoo as a result of being in a death camp during the Holocaust, you're allowed to be buried with your families, but it's something that's come about since then. So then you would go into camps. You were fed very little each day as you withered away. And after about 6 months to a year, depending on how well you were working, they would tell you, you've been good, we're going to send you out east where you can restart your life. But first you've got to shower, you smell like crap. They take you to the crematorium. They would have you take off your clothes, get under the shower, and then they'd turn on warm water. And part of the reason they turned on the warm water is if they used warm water, it made you absorb the Xylon X, which was the poison that they dropped in to gas you. You would die faster doing that. Then Jews would take your body, Jews that worked in the concentration camps, they would drag you over, stack you in an area, and as you got dry, they'd throw you in the crematorium and cremate you. Like I said, Auschwitz-Birkenau could cremate 12,000 people in a day. Okay, this is just this is a picture of some of the things that were taken off the Jewish bodies. The top left-hand side, that's a big pile of shoes on the left-hand side and clothes on the right-hand side of that same picture. Underneath you see some of the luggage that was used and a big pile of eyeglasses down at the bottom. The man on the right is a prisoner at Dachau who is forced to stand without moving for hours as punishment. If he didn't do that, then the punishment would actually go to his family. I've seen videos where they have taken Jews and put them in a chair and putting their hand in a vice and tightening the vice until it amputates the hand, just to kind of see how that works. This man right here, Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was a different kind of monster, but still a monster. And what he did is he started to run all types of medical tests on people. His favorite was twins. But he would put people in pressure chambers and increase the pressure until he basically squished them and crushed them. Uh, all the pressure in their ears would go to the point where it would burst their eardrums. He tested with drugs. He castrated people, chemically and otherwise. He froze people to death and did other things to them. So, as he's putting together test subjects, as people are getting off the train, he drew a line on the wall, and everyone who was underneath the line was sent off to the gas chamber as soon as they got there. Did all types of transplant surgeries just to see if they would work on twins. Anything from lungs to heart to eyes and even brains. And afterwards he would give it a few weeks, and then he'd have both of the twins, if they were still alive, executed. It is said that he finds a way to make twins because after the war is over, he escapes. He doesn't go on trial for what he did, and he moves to Brazil instead, where no one knows where he is until after he dies. He dies drowning in 1972. In the cities that he lived in Brazil, the birth rate of twins is actually close to 20%, whereas normally it's 0.8%. So he actually learned how to do that, but people have not really followed his studies because of how he found out everything. Here's some of the evidence of the fact that the Holocaust happened. On the left-hand side at the top, you see a person whose arm is amputated, and they've been starved so much that you can see the joints in their knees and each one of their individual ribs. The pile of bodies in the bottom left-hand side. The crematoriums the crematorium ovens up on the top right-hand side. A lot of them had, whenever they opened up the kilns, would see people, the skeletons of people who were scratching the door of the kilns. At Auschwitz alone, 1.3 million Jews were killed, and then another 300,000 Polish people, gypsies, and Soviet POWs. The top left-hand side, after it was over and these camps were liberated, the Soviets and Americans both got all people that lived in the surrounding neighborhoods and forced them to come out and view the bodies and help clean everything up. On the right-hand side there, you see some of the mass graves at Bergen-Belsen, and you can see one of the crematoriums that was burned down at Auschwitz. Now, moving off of this to the United States, that had no idea what was going on at this time. We had this belief in isolationism, and there were a lot of Americans who thought the fact that they were involved in World War I was a major mistake. They thought they could stay over there and nothing that happened in Europe would affect them. That's what that political cartoon's saying right there on the top left-hand side. The bottom right you have William Nye, and he was part of the Nye Committee, and he said the reason that the United States got involved in World War I was to make a lot of money for the people that owned all of the weapons manufacturing companies. The Panay Incident. Now, Japan invaded China in 1937. The United States had done this to a lot of territories over the last 100 years. We didn't approve of other countries, though, doing the same thing that we're doing. So, as a result of Japan invading China, FDR sent China weapons to fight the Japanese. This is what you would call an act of war. If two people are fighting and you give one side guns, you're absolutely siding. So the Japanese sunk the USS Panay, and then they later apologized, and we didn't go to war with Japan. Now, the main goal was to try and avoid going to war in any way whatsoever. So, what happens is we pass a series of neutrality acts, okay? You know what? Peace is more important than money. So, as a result of that, the Neutrality Act of 1935 made it illegal to sell arms or weapons to any country at war. We're taking a stance. Money does not mean as much as peace does. Then after 2 years of that, we're like, eh. So the Neutrality Act of 1937 says that warring countries could buy supplies on a cash and carry basis. We're not going to sell them weapons, but we'll sell them tents, we'll sell them boots, we'll sell them jeeps, we'll sell them ships without any weapons on it, but nothing you can use in warfare. We're going to make a stance. People need clothes, people need food, people need, things like that. Tents. The tents can be used for camping. They don't have to be used for warfare. Then 2 years later, we're just kind of like, screw it. The Neutrality Act of 1939, warring countries could buy weapons on a cash and carry basis. We just kind of give up that entirely. And then FDR actually makes another deal where we take 50 of our old U.S. destroyers that we were about to just put on Lake Michigan to either rot or sit there until we needed them, and we traded them to Great Britain to get 9 U.S. naval bases in the Western Hemisphere, and a few that were in the Pacific as well. So it makes it so that we're a little bit more powerful of an imperial power, and the British needed stuff to fight the Germans and the Japanese that were encroaching on their land. Now, the Spanish Civil War. This is a 3-year war, and this becomes the testing ground where Hitler will practice the same methods that he uses whenever he starts invading countries during World War II. Now, the person he sided with was a man by the name of Francisco Franco, who rules from 1939 until 1975. He took over Spain, and then once he does, he stays neutral in World War II. Spain is not involved in World War I or World War II. So the Soviets actually helped the king that was trying to stay in power, but things fall apart. What was really particularly horrible was what they did to the city of Guernica, and they just leveled the city. So many people died, and one of the most famous works of Pablo Picasso is a painting he does of Guernica. Now, if you look at it, it's not actually a picture quality type portrait, but it does show what happens there. Now, Anschluss. Okay, Anschluss means unification, and in 1938, as the leader of Germany, Hitler will unite with Austria. This breaks the Treaty of Versailles, that said that Germany and Austria could never unite. But Hitler does this. This brings in several million more Germans into Germany. Most of the Austrians speak German. They have all the same traditions and cultures, and you can see how people are treating Hitler as he's pulling into town. Everyone's doing the Hitler salute. Everyone's waving and cheering as he comes into the country. Remember, he was a son of Austria. So now Hitler has, started to openly defy against the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so they add all of this land back. Now the Munich Conference. Hitler wants the Sudetenland. This is part of Czechoslovakia. Most of the people there were German speaking. Okay, he wants to take this, but there's problems. He's got to take land away from Czechoslovakia. Now, Britain didn't want war. France had lost so many people they couldn't get anyone interested in fighting. Almost every household in France had either a husband, son, or father or brother that had been lost fighting in World War I, and as a result wanted no part of fighting another war. So Neville Chamberlain, who was a British Prime Minister, he speaks to Hitler, and he uses what's called appeasement or giving in to avoid war. If you're ever in a store and you see a child thrashing about because they want something and the parents give them what they want, that is called appeasement. Part of the problem is, if you do this, you show the other side that all they have to do for you to get what you want is, throw a fit. Neville Chamberlain comes out and says that he'd achieve peace in his time, and he says Herr Hitler is someone that we can do business with. 6 months later, Germany took over all of Czechoslovakia, knowing that the the rest of the world didn't want to act against him. As a result of this, Neville Chamberlain is going to step down from as the Prime Minister of England and be replaced by Winston Churchill. Churchill will be in power for the majority of World War II, and he inspired Britain to fight during the war. Whenever the final peace talks are done at the end of World War II, he is actually voted out of office before they get a chance to negotiate the peace. Now, one of the last things that's done before World War II officially starts is the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, where diplomats from Germany and the Soviet Union get together and they make an agreement to not fight and to divide Poland. They were not allies in any way, but this made Stalin think that he never had to worry about Hitler. When Hitler actually invades about 2 years later, he's so offended and angry that he wants to get his revenge. This leads us to the end of today. Thank you everyone for sticking with me one more day. I hope everyone has a good day. Please don't cocaine, please don't AIDS, and please don't COVID. And be safe, but don't be as safe. I'll see you soon.